Hey guys, it's Kent here, your skeptical gunsmith. Figured I'd kind of jump in on the Sig P320 issue, kind of try to analyze and give you my thoughts on what's actually taking place. And to do that, we're going to go through kind of a variety of systems here. First, we're going to make sure all these guns are unloaded. Yep, walk through, make sure they're all clear, then I'll disassemble them pretty quickly. As you can see, we've got P320, we got a Glock, we've got an HK VP9, we've got a Sig 229, and I've got a Series 80 Colt Gold Cup National Match with a beautiful idiot scratch there that somebody put in the gun, which is always lovely. And that too is empty. All right. So all these guns are empty. I'm going to actually start with the Colt here real quick, just to give you an idea of what I want to talk about. Because it's exceedingly important. Whoop. And what we're going to really be discussing here today is that is a Series 80 firing pin safety. And that's really at the root cause of all these guns and the Sig P320 and why we're having these issues. Is this was adopted actually in the Series 80 model, as the name implies. It's why many people don't like the Series 80, is because the trigger actually has to move this little lever right here, right there, in order to depress this plunger right here. Once you depress that plunger, the firing pin can go all the way through and strike the primer. That's how it works. So if you don't depress the trigger, right, that lever right there that you can kind of see moving, that lever's not going to come up if you don't depress the trigger, and it's not going to depress that plunger, and the gun won't fire. It's a safety mechanism, and it's why people don't like the Series 80, because it requires the trigger to be pulled in order to raise that lever, thus decreasing trigger feel. Now, there was an earlier version called a Schwartz type device, which is actually the same principle. It depressed that same plunger, but it did so with the grip safety. So as you depress the grip safety had a little lever that came up and depressed the Schwartz type device, unlocking basically the firing pin, allowing the gun to fire. And it was actually quite brilliant, but it wasn't compatible. It was actually a pre-World War II design, wasn't compatible with the M1911A1, so they discontinued it. And then we got the Series 80 device, which we're looking at here. I liked the earlier one because, and you see it actually on some Kimber models, I think some para-ordnance models. I liked it because the trigger was unaffected. All right, I'm going to put that aside for just a moment. So that's what we're going to talk about here, that Series 80 firing pin safety, because we see it on pretty much every one of these guns. I'm going to have a whole bunch of parts laying around here. That's okay. So there it is. We're seeing it right there. That's on a Sig P320. That is the same Series 80 type. I'm sure it's got a different patent, works slightly differently, but that is a Series 80 type. You can see that little lever right there. That's what's going to disconnect it. And so they all kind of rely on some element of that Series 80 type firing pin plunger to limit the movement of the firing pin unless the trigger is pulled. Move those aside. All right. Here's a couple of, now we're kind of getting down to the nitty gritty. I wanted to go through those two so you understood what we were looking at, because these three guns, the Glock, the VP9, and the Sig P320 are all striker-fired guns. We were looking at hammer-fired guns here. And the striker-fired guns all have kind of a slightly different methodology. They're all striker-fired. They all function basically in the same way. But two of these manufacturers adopted a couple of different safety measures that this one did not. And to be frank, I'm a huge Sig Sauer fan. Been a Sig Sauer armor for 25 years. I've got plenty of SIGs in the lineup, and you know, I just hope they can figure this out, because it's a great brand. They make fantastic guns, and I've got nothing against them other than they seem to be having some issues with the P320. All right, so first the Glock. The Glock's got basically 3 safeties, right? These 2 guns, when you rack the slide, like so, the firing pin, or the striker in this case, is 100% cocked. Hopefully you can see that right there. See that little red dot? That's why I brought the VP9, because you can clearly see it. And when you pull the trigger, it releases that. Boom. Do you see that? Hopefully you got a good visual of that. It's all the way back. As you pull the trigger, it disappears, firing the gun. So the striker is 100% cocked in that gun, as it is in the Sig 320. So same thing here. You can't see it, but the striker is 100% locked to the rear, unlike the Glock. So the Glock has basically 3 safeties. One, it's got the in the trigger safety device. This is a Timney trigger in this gun, which is a great trigger for this gun. It's a in the trigger safety device, and it works very simply by it just impacts the frame. And so that little device right here is impacting the frame unless you pull the trigger. If you pull the trigger, then the trigger can move freely. If you don't pull the trigger won't go back, because that device is impacting the back of the frame right there. Super simple. Likewise, the H&K VP9 has a similar one. Doesn't quite impact the frame in the same way as the Glock, but it's doing the same job. All right. Next, safety number 2 on the Glock. The striker isn't a 100% cocked. So in a Glock, the other safe feature about the Glock is you cock the gun, the striker is, let's call it 3/4 cocked. And when you pull the trigger, you're cocking it the rest of the way, which is why a Glock has a staple gun type trigger. So that's safety number 2. Number 1, in the trigger. Number 2, striker's only 3/4 cocked. Number 3, you've got your Series 80 firing pin block right there. And in the Glock, it's got a lever. You can see it right here. That little lever right there, that's tied to the trigger bar. When you move it, it comes up. Hopefully you can see that. You can see it moving. There you go. You can see that little lever moving. As you pull the trigger, it comes up and back, depresses the firing pin block. Now the firing pin is free to move forward and can strike the primer. So Glock has 3, count them, 3 safeties. VP9 basically has 2. So the VP9 has the same in the trigger safeties. You got to pull the trigger, that little lever right there in the center, in order for the gun to fire. And it's got their own version of a Series 80 type firing pin block, and it's right here. And theirs rotates. So I'm sure there's a different patent for this. Probably got some guy's name on it. I don't know who it is, probably German. But it rotates out of the way. You can clearly see it blocking the striker here. So when cocked, that striker's all the way back, 100% back, ready to fire, but it is not going anywhere because this firing pin safety block is keeping it from moving forward. As you pull the trigger, right, you've got a little mechanism here. You can kind of see where they line up. You have a little, your trigger bar, just like in your Glock, your trigger bar is moving rearward, and this little device right here is capturing this and rotating that safety out of the way. Pretty simple. So 2 safeties on the HK, right? Okay, move this aside. Now we're going to go to the Sig P320. Great gun, very well thought out, has a fire control unit. You guys are all probably familiar with it. And we're just going to walk through real quick the safeties on the 320. So no safety in the trigger, right? Nothing there. Just doesn't exist. But what it does have is a Series 80 type firing pin blocker. And as you see me moving the trigger, you can see that little lever moving right here. That's it. So that little lever's moving up as I move the trigger, and it is interacting with this little spring retained lever in the slide, and this is your firing pin safety right here. And again, in the P320, when you cock the gun, that striker's all the way to the rear. So the only thing keeping it from firing is A, the trigger and this safety, and B, this little lever right here, moving up and engaging that. And I think the challenge they're having is this is a pretty small piece. You notice sort of the size and complexity of the firing pin safety on these three different guns. Sig Sauer 229, brilliant gun. H&K VP9, very complex, very big, sturdy. The 320, unfortunately, I think this firing pin safety is just a little too small, a little too, I dare use the word flimsy, but it's tiny, right? And it's got a little spring in there. And if that little spring fails in some interesting way or gets corroded or get junk in there, and this thing is pressed down, then the only thing keeping the gun from firing is A, pulling the trigger, or some kind of inertia, forcing that firing pin to move forward. And I think that's where happening, right? The unfortunate incident with the airman, the guy had the gun in the holster, laid it flat down on the table, and that was enough inertia because I'm guessing this firing pin safety was in some kind of compromised situation that allowed the striker to move forward and fire the gun, unfortunately, and that killed that airman. Similarly, the female resources officer at the school, probably maybe they didn't clean the gun well. Maybe that could be an issue. There's some gunk that gets trapped in that little square, that little rectangle right there, keeping this thing down, and then an impact is all it would take to discharge the 320. These are just my thoughts on it. Again, love Sig Sauer, great brand, have plenty of them myself. I hope they kind of work through these issues. Hope this was helpful, and hope you enjoyed the video. Take care.